History at Play has welcomed audiences from all over the world to our Wednesday evening HAP and chats. Now, as we are facing a new crisis in our nation, we must realign our focus to best serve social rights and justice. Now, our HAP and chat programs continue to bring light to contemporary situations through historical reference. They are highly researched and based on primary source information and are brought to you with love, respect, and a desire to create an atmosphere and an environment where we can sustain and promote liberty and justice for all. HAP and Chat is brought to you by History at Play. History at Play was established in 2010 to chronicle the lives of influential and often forgotten women. Kalaora is a professional actress, educator, writer, and living historian. She holds a Bachelor of Fine Arts from Syracuse University and attended the Globe Education Program at Shakespeare's Globe Theatre of London. After the program, you will have the opportunity to ask questions. For more information on where to see History at Play portray other influential and often forgotten women, you can visit them at historyatplay.com and follow them on their socials using the handle historyatplay. And now we'd like you to enjoy HAP and Chat.
Mom! Mother! Father! Mom! Dad! Where are you? They're rioting outside. They're rioting in the streets. They've come to the governor, the lieutenant governor's mansion, just around the corner from where we live. They're destroying it. They're throwing rocks through Thomas Hutchinson's windows. They're climbing up the roof and they're tearing the rafters clean off of the house. I knew this would happen. I knew that it was coming to this. This dirty little war, King George's dirty little war, it couldn't go on any longer. Parliament has put too much upon us. They have tyrannized us. They have taken away our liberties, our rights. We are not but second-class subjects in these colonies. King George's dirty little war. France and England fighting for control of the colonies here in North America, and now Parliament is bankrupt, and they have passed the writs of assistance so that we may assist them. So that we may pay for King George's dirty little war. They've taken away our rights. How are we supposed to pay? And when we can make no money ourselves, our businesses are limited. We are being forced to buy British goods from British partners. They are taxing us on lead, glass, dye for coloring our textiles, our clothing. They are taxing us on tea. They are taxing us on printed goods. Printed goods like birth certificates, death certificates. I have friends who they've buried their family members in Copp's Hill and the granary across the Mill Creek in downtown in Boston. They've buried them without notice to the municipality, for they do not want to pay a tax on a death certificate. There's a mad rush to get married so that we won't have to pay for our marriage certificates. Not that I'll ever get married. Nearly 20. All hopes of that are gone. I'm Rachel Walker. I live in North Boston. I attend the Cockrell Church. I am a subject of the British Parliament and the British Empire. And I am not but a second-class citizen. I have not the right to vote, yet I am seeing my brothers and my sisters riot and protest in the streets. This reminds me of what my parents told me when I was just a little girl. I was 2, and there were riots like this in Boston. And the governor, he escaped to Castle William off South Boston. He escaped to a bunker so that no one could touch him there. He said they would rally up the militia to fight us. They cannot fight us, for we are the militia. We are the ones that we are supposed to fight. And now the governor, he continues to implement these acts, these taxes. Meanwhile, he is not following our requests for non-importation agreements. Why are we being taxed on lead? We can make lead. We can make it here in Boston. For what reason are we taxed on glass? We can make glass. Perhaps it is imperfect, perhaps it is discolored, yet we can make it. We need not these British-owned goods. We need not to trade with the partners of England. We have the resources here in America to make these things. I can go out and pick berries myself, crush them, and create dye for my very own gown. I need not buy the dye and pay a tax. I never thought it would come to this. I never thought I would see the people, my friends, my family, running through the streets of Boston, attacking the Lieutenant Governor Thomas Hutchinson's house. It is just doors away from my own house, and all I can hear outside is the roar of the rioters and the smashing of glass. This dirty little war, and now we are intended to pay for it. We can make these goods here in America. We need not pay these taxes. I know they will follow Andrew Oliver, the tax collector, the customs officer. They will follow him. They are carrying effigies through the street that appear to resemble him. They are ripping the head off of the effigies, burning the effigies in fire. They will force him to resign his post under the Liberty Tree, right across the way, right near the Common. And I feel I am isolated here in North Boston. I feel as though I am a prisoner, for we are on an island. And I know not where my mother or father are. I don't know if they've taken safety with a relative yet. I was out in the streets. I thought we were going to be protesting peacefully. And then I saw Ebenezer McIntosh, that gang leader, that South Hill gang leader, leading these men through the streets with sticks and torches and stones and bricks. And now they are destroying the Lieutenant Governor's mansion. Thomas Hutchinson is a good man, misguided perhaps. I know within his house, I know he has the largest collection of books chronicling the history of our great colony, the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And now, as I peer out the window toward Governor Hutchinson's home, just round the corner, all I can see is the blaze. All I can see is our town burning. Fires everywhere in the streets. And I don't know if the fires will spread here. I am only round the corner from Governor Hutchinson. Rachel, calm down. You must find a way to locate your mother and father, and must ensure that they are safe. I wish you all safety. I do not remember the last time Boston has been under fire in this manner. I was only 2 when we rioted last. They were impressing our sailors, men, some of whom were not even professional sailors. They worked only in their spare time aboard the vessels. And yet the British Navy continued to impress them and force them to serve on board their ships and vessels, just so they could continue to fight Britain's dirty little wars. And now once more, King George, fat King George, he has brought havoc upon our town. And we have no choice. Yet this is not the way to destroy the home of our Lieutenant Governor, to destroy the property, the history of our great colony. This is not the way. The Stamp Act riots, they are tearing our town apart, and I wish you all Godspeed, and I wish you safety. All I can hear is dogs barking in the street. They are wild and they are crazy, for the fires continue to burn. I must find my mother and father. Friends, I hope all of you in North Boston find a safe place to go. Do not go to Castle William. That's where the governor may be hiding. You coward. We will control these riots on our own. I must go out and find my mother and father. I must ensure that they are safe. I can see Governor Hutchinson. Lieutenant Governor Hutchinson's house is burning from the windows. I must make sure my mother and father are safe. Please, I wish you all safety. Please stay calm. Find your loved ones and stay with them until this crisis is over. Take care and be well. Godspeed to all of you. We will have liberty. And we will have justice, and we will establish a self-government where fat King George can no longer tyrannize us with his pockets of endless spending and parliamentary tyrannical decisions and despotism. I wish you all safety. Farewell. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. In light of the fact that, one, we have been performing for 12 weeks for you, and two, there are certainly major world cataclysmic events occurring at this time, it is important to know that I'm now working off of prior knowledge of Boston's history and world history, and where Rachel Walker Revere, me, would be in 1765 during the Stamp Act riots which overthrew Boston and tore our town apart. I would like to take questions from the audience regarding what Boston was like and is like back when I was 2 and we rioted. It was 1745 or so. And now, today, in 1765, in protest to King George III and the tyrannical Stamp Act and other writs of assistance and impositions being put upon us by the British Empire. We do not have the right to trial by jury, and the customs officers are entering our homes, and they are searching for taxable goods. And if they locate taxable goods in our homes, lead, glass, dye for coloring our fabric, tea, a deck of playing cards, and that tax has not been paid, they are forcing us to pay. And if we are unable to pay, they are seizing the goods from our property. Search and seizure has taken over this town, and I do believe Andrew Oliver, the customs officer, the commissioner of the stamp tax, will be forced to retire or resign under duress. What questions do you have for me, Rachel Walker, not yet Revere? It's from Michelle Rosen, who says, "This is our country's early history. It feels more like the current nightly news." Indeed. Hello, Angela. Guten Nacht to you. If you have questions for me, for Rachel Walker, please do. Very good, Mr. Dean Harmon. The riots when I was about 2, were those the result of previous colonial wars? Yes. There were wars that were being fought in the 1740s, 1745. It is a war that mainly has to do in this vicinity in the Boston area with the impressment, meaning being forced into service by British sailors and the British Navy. You see, the Navy is hard set for sailors. Time and time again, we see in the War of Spanish Succession, we see a huge number of naval sailors. This is in 1714 to 1726. We see a huge number of sailors employed by the British Royal Navy. And then after that employment ends, they release over 40% of the British naval fleet because they are no longer needing them and they no longer have enough posts for them. Those naval men often turn to merchant sailing as well as turning to piracy, which is why you have during the 1714s through 1726 what we call the golden age of piracy. Now, pirates are not permitted to come here to Boston. In fact, the closest place that pirates are given haven is on an island off the coast of Massachusetts called Martha's Vineyard. It is very lawless there, and it has no true rulership or governship, and so thereby the pirates are welcomed there more freely and are able to spend time there without being disturbed. That said, here in Boston, those pirates are often executed, hanged, and put on the harbor. They're hanged on the harbor, so when high tide comes, it washes their bodies away. Now, what happens in England is after they release all of these sailors, they find themselves in the midst of many other bitter and embroiled naval campaigns with various countries, whether it is France or whether it is Spain or the Netherlands, and they no longer have the ability to employ the naval sailors that they need because they have released all of them starting in the early 18th century. And once the sailors see how much of a better life they can have as pirates, where they are given a democratic rule and a democratic vote on board their naval vessels, and they follow what is called a pirate code, where every man gets his own share and every man is treated freely and easily and has a say as to where that ship will sail and what other ships they will plunder to take the booty. Many sailors refuse to go back into naval service because they have this new experience of freedom and wealth that they did not have under the rule of the British Royal Navy. For merchant sailors, it was very difficult. They were rarely paid, and when they were often underpaid, and they were treated not nearly as well as many of these pirates were treated. But the main issue in the 1740s is that the British Royal Navy requires sailors, and they are coming to America to impress sailors or even part-time sailors into service. And that is enraging the people of Boston to the point where we riot. I was only 2, so I don't remember it with all of the details that I wish I could share with you today. However, it is in response to that impressment that many of these rioters take over the streets and force the governor into a fort, which is called Fort William. It's on Castle Island. It's off of the south shore of Boston in what is called South Boston. That is the main reason for our troubles in the 1740s. In the 1760s, the current time that it is now, we are reeling from the French and Indian War, King George's War. And we are, as I mentioned, facing search and seizure. We are also facing trial without jury. I have many family members and friends of family, who have been charged with petty crimes, petty theft. And instead of standing trial with a speedy trial with a jury of his peers here in the town of Boston, these petty criminals are being shipped off to the Admiralty courts of London and tried for petty theft. And it is less expensive for the Admiralty court to let them die and rot in a prison cell in England than it is for them to send these petty criminals back to their families in Boston. It is for this reason that we are rioting. The taxes are simply the cherry on top. Very good question. What happened in my life as far as meeting Paul? So Patricia, I will tell you all about how I met Paul in a few weeks' time during Paper HAP, and I actually have some very good news for you, Patricia. So I want you to make sure you stay put till the end of HAP and Chat, because you may have been selected for a very wonderful prize, which will allow you to enjoy that. But I will tell the story of how I met my later husband, Paul. You're now speaking as an oracle, I see, because as it is only 1765 at this point in time, Paul Revere is married to a young woman named Sarah Orne. And she is a lucky lass, because he is quite a handsome man, if you know what I mean. So I will tell you all about that, Patricia. Stay put. I have good news for you. Michelle, how did I meet Paul? Same thing. I will go over this in the full-length performance of Rendezvous with Rachel Revere, which happens 10 years later. I cannot address how I met Paul. I only know Paul Revere from attending church with him at the Cockerell Church. We are both Protestant. So this is very eye-opening from Rick. I agree, it feels like our current situation. Did my family join the protest? I am an only child. My mother and father were out with other, we have some relatives that live in what's called North Boston. You, I believe, refer to it as the North End. And I was able to locate my family. As an only child, I feel a great responsibility to my parents. I also must tell you, my parents were both in their 40s when I was born, so they're quite aged. At this point in time, being near 60 years old, I felt very tremendously for fear for their lives, that I would not be able to find them. I was able to locate them at the home of a friend, and that friend lives near relatives of ours who are also in the neighborhood. So yes, they were located and they are safe and sound. Thank you, Rick, for your concern. My goodness, I'm dirty. There was so much strife in the streets and I was getting pummeled by pieces and chunks of dirt everywhere. John, what type of work am I and my family engaged in? So my father works as a very, I will at this point in time, just for the sake of time, switch out of my my role as Rachel Revere and introduce you to my alter ego, because very little is known about Richard Walker and Rachel Carlisle Walker, who are the parents of Rachel Walker, later on to be Rachel Walker Revere. So her parents, we know that they were raised, and we know that they were born in the North End. It seems that her father may have worked in bookbinding or in a general store. The mother, we don't know very much about Rachel Carlisle, about her background. It's a wonderful question, even though I was commissioned by the Paul Revere House to do a program about Rachel Revere, they didn't have even a lot of information to offer regarding Rachel's parents, who are Richard and Rachel Carlisle Walker. My name is Judith Kalaora. I'm the Artistic Director of History at Play. I felt it was timely to bring to light some other points in our American history where specifically some of the folks that I portray in our other programs were engaged or embroiled in riots. Now, we don't have actual verifiable evidence that Rachel was part of the riot, but we do know that the North End, if you've ever been to the North End, it is a very small area, and it was even smaller during the colonial era. And so because it was such a small area, you could walk from one end of the North End to the other in 5 minutes. And so that means that if there was a tremendous riot, which this was one of the biggest riots. The Stamp Act riots lasted for several days. And really it was when word got to England that the Stamp Act riots were destroying Boston and that Bostonians were tearing their homes apart, tearing the Lieutenant Governor's mansion apart. That's when Parliament actually repealed the Stamp Act. So the Stamp Act was never fully implemented here in the colonies because Andrew Oliver, the commissioner of the tax, could not get the support. He could not get the people to obey the law in that regard. People were from the very beginning resistant to taxation. And there was a phenomenal orator at the very beginning of the movement named James Otis, whose family had been looked over for a post in parliamentary, or what I should say, provincial government. Parliament is in England, provincial government is the government of Boston that really commanded it was really the taking orders from the Parliament, although we were, when we established the town of Boston, able to freely elect our legislative assembly leaders to vote and to represent us in the legislative assembly that met at the townhouse. Also in 1765 and at other points, windows of the townhouse, which is today called the Old State House, which is on the top of State Street, they were smashed as well. So our government buildings and our politicians' and leaders' residences were pillaged, rioted, and destroyed. During the siege of Boston, 10 years later after the Stamp Act riots, the British officers, or the British soldiers, I should say, come into the American Bostonian Whig-owned homes. A Whig is someone who supports free and independent government. A loyalist or a Tory supports parliamentary government. And they would come into these Whig-owned homes and they would basically pillage and loot. They looted everything from these homes. So these British soldiers were entering homes and taking tapestries, silver, carpets, anything of value, furniture, books. Books were of the greatest value, and that's why Thomas Hutchinson's library being burned to the ground was such a big tragedy for us in America, because it did maintain such a phenomenal history of the American colonies, specifically with a focus on Massachusetts. So, pardon me, was the family impacted by the Quartering Act from John? So the Quartering Act is when, for those of you who are unfamiliar, the Quartering Act is during the siege of Boston. British general, who was also the military governor of Massachusetts, named Thomas Gage, enacted several acts. We hated them so much that we called them the Intolerable Acts. But British Parliament actually referred to them as the Coercive Acts, and they were intended to coerce the Bostonian people and the American colonists into subduing and surrendering to the British occupation so that the riots and the rebellion would not spread. So this is in the 1770s. So the Intolerable/Coercive Acts occur after the Boston Tea Party. The Boston Tea Party is December 16, 1773. That's when 5,000 British troops come to Boston and occupy the town. 5,000 British troops is one British soldier for every 2.5 people that lived in Boston. 15,000 people lived in the town of Boston in 1773, 1774. So when they passed the Quartering Act, it meant that the British soldiers who had originally been living on Boston Common in a military encampment could now be put in our homes. So in the homes of private citizens, which means that as a private citizen, you would have to cook their food and feed them before you fed your children. You'd have to provide a bed to sleep in, even if it meant you or your children sleeping on the floor. You would have to help them when they needed assistance. And so there's a joke that we used to burn their food and we used to short sheet their beds. But we still had to live with them. And there are no reports that Paul Revere and Rachel Walker Revere had to deal with the Quartering Act, because remember, Paul Revere and Rachel Walker Revere and their children escaped from Boston and went to Watertown. And so the Quartering Act was really isolated to the inhabitants of Boston. The other two intolerable acts, one was called the Government Act, that banned all forms of town meetings and public assemblies or protests. And the third one was called the Government Act, Quartering Act, and I'm going to completely blank out. I'm going to get it in a second. So the Government Act, which banned town meetings, they still were able, a lot of the Sons of Liberty would go down into the cellars of taverns or they would lock the doors of churches and bar them closed, and the British soldiers would be trying to break down the doors of the churches, and they couldn't get inside to stop these town meetings from occurring. So if you look at the Bill of Rights for the United States Constitution, I'm going to put this down a little bit because I think I'm kind of a little bit off screen here. If you look at the Bill of Rights for the United States Constitution, the freedom to assemble is one of the very first amendments in our Bill of Rights, and that is because of the intolerable or coercive acts that were passed in Boston following the Boston Tea Party. And now that's a little too low. It takes me a second to see it. So that is one of the reasons why we have the Bill of Rights. The no quartering of troops in private homes, that is another Bill of Rights amendment. So because of what happens in Boston during the siege of Boston, the government of our nation can never quarter troops in private or residential homes. The British military did pay rent, so it's not like you had to house these soldiers completely for free, but you did have to live with them, and if you stayed in Boston, that was one of the punishments. Boston was also starving. They stopped all shipments of food coming into Boston, so shipments were actually detoured to Salem, Massachusetts. So there were several townspeople from outside of Boston, including Deborah Sampson's husband's family. For those of you who are familiar with Deborah Sampson, she's one of the other women that History at Play portrays. Deborah Sampson's father, Mr. Gannett, he actually was smuggling grain and food into Boston, not by the post roads. The post roads were essentially the highways, but by back roads so that people could survive. So let me see. Interesting that the impressment issue would rise its head again. Yeah, and Jean, as you know, you said interesting that the impressment issue would rise its head again and cause another war. Yeah, because of course the War of 1812, which Dolly Madison is very much a part of, another portrayal we have, that is largely due to impressment as well, and also importation and trade agreements. So similar cause. This is why it's so important that we learn history, because we keep repeating it over and over and over again. Thank you. Oh, hi, Mary. It's good to see you. I am like completely having a mental block. Does anyone remember? It's the Quartering Act, the Government Act, and the Act. And, you know, when I was a guide for 15 years, this would have slipped off of my tongue so easily, but right now I'm having a hard time. If anyone remembers what the third act of the Coercive or Intolerable Acts is, please let me know, because I'm going to kind of run myself into the ground right now thinking of it. I'm going to even look it up. So does anyone have any questions for me in the last minute or so? And I'm going to give out our prize for this week's HAP and Chat. Ding! Let's see, the Coercive Acts. They were Government Act and the Port Act. Ha! Yes! Okay, Port Act. Boston Harbor is closed. No ships can enter or exit until the damaged tea is paid for. The Port Act was probably the worst of the three coercive acts because Boston was a port town. We relied entirely on our access to the waterfront in order to have a living, in order to have an economy, in order to travel. So to limit or shut down the port of Boston, the Port Act was a death sentence for the town of Boston. And here's the crazy thing, where really, I'm going to show you a map of Boston. I'm going to put it in the notes here. Really, King George III and General Gage both shot themselves in the foot when they passed the Port Act, because contrary to popular belief, not everyone in Boston was a Whig. Not everyone in Boston was a revolutionary. A lot of people in Boston were very, very much loyal to Parliament, and they were loyal to the Crown. And so what that means is when you shut down the port, you essentially tell all of these people who are loyal to King George III that King George III isn't going to let you run your business because they're merchant sailors. They own a fleet of merchant vessels, and now those merchant vessels are no longer able to do their work. And so all of these loyalists who worked as merchant sailors or had a fleet of merchant vessels become so desperate that they either leave Boston and they go to another port, maybe Richmond, maybe Baltimore, somewhere where they can access a waterway, or they turn coat and they join the Whigs, they join the rebels, they join what we call the Patriots, and they fight in America's War for Independence. So I've got that map here. I'm going to put that map in the comments after we're done, and that way you can kind of see Boston as a peninsula. So there's really no way in or out of Boston except by boat, unless you take this really, really narrow strip of land called Boston Neck, which actually submerges during high tide. So Boston's almost an island. The Native Americans called Boston Turtle Island. All right, for this week's Happen Chat, wasn't it about administering justice in England rather than locally in Boston? Yes, Michelle, and that's part of the problem is since we considered ourselves an independent sort of sovereign entity, we had been self-governing since the establishment of Boston in 1630, when the writs of assistance in 1761 started to force our petty criminals to be shipped off to London across the voyage to England on a regular vessel, not a speed vessel. A regular vessel could be upwards of 4 months. Usually the trade winds on the way back meant that you could get here in about 3 months, but a lot of people didn't even survive that voyage. So let's say you stole, books from a bookstore, or you stole some money, but you borrowed money, but you didn't pay it back, and you were charged with theft. Now, instead of having a trial here in Boston at the townhouse, where you're being tried by your own peers, your own Bostonians, fellow Bostonians, you're being shipped off to England. So that defied the speedy trial by jury that we so hold to be an aspect of our American government that is fundamentally right and fundamentally true. There was no speed because you were going on a boat for 4 to 6 months, depending on the weather. And then it was often cheaper for them to throw you in jail and rot, whether you were guilty or not, than send you back to America to be with your family. So it was trial by jury was part of the major aspects of the writs of assistance in regard to the parliamentary response to King George's dirty little war, which was the French and Indian War. All right, this week's winner is Patricia Johnson. Patricia, I'm so happy that you asked to know what would happen to or how Rachel would meet Paul Revere, because this week you win a free paper HAP. And that means that when we are having, you can use this whenever you want, but if you want to watch Rachel and how she meets Paul, that will be coming up in several weeks' time. You got to just check out our schedule, which is also on our Facebook page. And this gives you a free pass to join Pay Per HAP, which is our Friday evening watch group. And that will be at 7:30 p.m. Friday evening. And I will put in the comments what the date is for Rendezvous with Rachel Revere, which is when you will learn about that. But you're also going to get, Patricia, some information about Rendezvous with Rachel Revere. And you're going to get a cool History at Play sticker. And I'm always amazed that people tend to love the signed headshots that I'm giving. So you're also going to get a signed headshot and more information. Thank you, Patricia. Thank you for watching. I would love to have you direct message me your snail mail address so that I can send that to you right away. I'll get that out to you in the mail tomorrow. You know, I did a school performance yesterday and I gave a prize to one of the students and I said, send me your snail mail address. And she wrote me an email and she said, what is snail mail? So that's just to let you know how antiquated and old you should all feel. All right, ladies and gents, that's all for today. As always, I thank you for your support. Happen Chat will run through June 17th. We do appreciate your support. Contributions are accepted by Venmo, PayPal, and on our website by credit and debit. If you'd like to know how to send payment by check, please do email us. I'm going to put some information up, and I will see you all next week. And for those of you who are joining us this week for Friday night's Paper HAP, it's Victorian gossip girl Annie Adams Fields. Thank you very much. Everyone, please stay safe. This is a very scary time, but please remember that we are living through history right now, and I'm glad to be experiencing it with you. So please promise me you will all make history. I love you. Take care. Good evening. Bye-bye.